talk about ego and intellect, and then we're going to take questions on that. Okay?
Okay. Okay. Voice, can everybody hear? They said they had the sound fixed, so is the sound fixed? Everyone hear all right? Okay. The guy in the booth said thumbs up. So, any problem at all? It's good? Okay, good. All right, ego and intellect is the subject for this afternoon. First, we need to define ego, I guess, what it is and what it isn't. And we talked a little bit about it this morning, but we'll talk a little bit more about it now. You know, Freud was the one that came up with the term ego, right? That's a Freudian concept. Freud broke the structure of the mind or structure of the individual into three parts. He said you had an ego, which was the part of kind of awareness, the intellect, if you will. And he said you had an id, which was your instincts, the things that were in your subconscious, below the intellect's reach. And then he added later a superego. And the superego was that part of you that wasn't about self, that was about other. That's the part that could, that was the part that love inhabited, if you will. That's the part that could be altruistic, think about other people rather than self. So the id, the ego, and the superego was the Freudian model. Now in our health sciences, we need to understand what is healthy and what's not. And it's not really so much about the health as it is about statistics, what's average and what's not. If you are typical, then you're healthy, whether you really are or not. That's just the way the words are defined. Abnormal psychology is the psychology of people who aren't normal, you see. So we know right away that if this is our definition of mental health, it's the way most of us are. That's not really about health. That's statistics, right? If most of us are neurotic, then most of us that are neurotic define health. And if you're not neurotic, you're not healthy, you're abnormal. You see, so we have to understand what health means, you know, in this context. For instance, when you buy food, you'll have this little sticker that tells you about the nutritional value, and there's one little column that is the percent of your requirement, of a daily requirement, right, that's there, and it'll be, you know, this is 50% of your daily requirement of vitamin C, or that kind of thing. Where did this daily requirement come from? Well, we imagine that some scientist somewhere did research and withheld, say, the vitamin C until somebody showed signs of vitamin C deficiency, and then added a little bit back until those signs went away, and that's the minimum daily requirement, and it's all good science. That's not how it was done at all. How it was done is back in the I think it was probably the early 1900s, World War I believe, there was a concern over nutrition. Were the soldiers getting the nutrition they needed in order to be effective fighters? Somebody said, we don't know. What should they be getting? So they looked at the average. What did the average person eat? Well, that became your minimum daily requirement. Whatever the average person ate was what everybody needed to eat, at least that much. So there really wasn't any science to do that. Again, the average became healthy and good, and off average, you know, was the problem. Well, that's kind of the way we operate. We are herd animals. Okay, now I should say, you know, the anthropologist would take me to task with that. You know, we're not herd animals, we're tribal animals. But I say herd animals because that gets the point across a lot more clearly. We're herd animals. We want to conform. We want to be normal. We don't like being different. We fear being different. And when we see someone or something that is different, It frightens us. We're not quite sure about that. Is that thing going to get us? Is it going to, is it going to hurt us? Is it not right? So that's part of our part of our concept of life is that things are abnormal are not good. And they need to get normal or get away. It's kind of the attitude we have. So people that are different religion, different culture, different ideas, different viewpoints, they all frighten us, and we don't like them, and we feel superior to them because we have a herd mentality. We like to follow the herd. Conformity is important to us. Now that's us under the hood. Okay? Now we don't have to be that way. We have free will. We can make better decisions than based on fear that has to do with our herd instincts, if you will. So we talk about ego. When Freud looked at people and came up with his theories, it was because of the people he looked at. So he looked at a whole bunch of people, and when he did, he saw patterns and consistencies. And that's how he came up with his id, ego, and superego. Okay? Now, a psychologist will tell you that it's a requirement for you to have a healthy ego. So there's a lot of confusion here. Well, what's a healthy ego? A healthy ego is a normal ego. That's how you define a healthy ego. It's that ego that the average person walks around with. Okay? That's the healthy ego that they will tell you need to have. Why? Because if you didn't have that healthy ego, well, that's your sense of self. And if you didn't have that, you wouldn't know who you were. People would push you around, they'd walk all over you, you wouldn't have any self-presence or individual power. You'd just be this piece of jello that didn't really know who they were. This ego is important to you. Well, that's the view when you look at a dysfunctional society. And you see that most of the people have a lot of ego. And ego becomes normal. Good, you have to have that much. That's like your minimum percent daily. It's your minimum percent of ego that you have to have in order to be a healthy person in our society. Well, that's why there's a lot of confusion, because we talk about ego, and many people think, ego, well, I need that. I can't not have it. I give up my ego. Who am I? What am I without the ego? That's my identity. But I'm trying to untangle this confusion for you. So the idea that ego is a good thing is really an error that was generated because ego is a normal thing. As it turns out, once you get rid of your fear and your beliefs, you get rid of your ego with it, because ego is a manifestation of your fear. Well, what happens when you have no ego? Does that mean you don't know who you are anymore? You don't have a self, concept or presence? No, that doesn't mean that at all. Okay, so the ego goes when the fear goes, and that's a good thing. That's a very good thing. Consciousness is self-aware. Okay, so if we talk about self-concept, we talk about Descartes. I think, therefore I am. It works as well the other way. I am, therefore I think. It means you're aware of yourself, your mind, and your own thoughts. Okay, now that's consciousness. You're conscious. If you weren't aware of your own thoughts, you wouldn't be conscious. Consciousness is self-aware. That's not ego. It's not until that self-awareness is in response to fear that you produce ego. Okay, so fear of survival, fear of getting the next meal, fear of being liked, fear of being not being loved, fear of not being liked, fear of being adequate, superior, I don't know, all the things we get afraid of, fear for our children, fear for generally in a scary world. We live in this scary world that's full of scary things that frighten us. You can't walk in the park at night, because it's too scary. Well, we have all of this fear, and we get connected to the fear. Part of our personality, the way we create our reality, gets attached to this fear. We start creating a different reality out of this fear than we would if we didn't have the fear. And then we live in that reality, and the more fear we have, then the easier it is to get more fear. And it just kind of snowballs. And you know, we live in a very fearful reality now. We're afraid of almost everything. Everything will get us. And it's not a healthy place to be. Okay, so ego is something that we want to let go of when we let go of the fear. Now, what's left? Okay, what is the difference between the self-awareness with and without an ego? Well, self-awareness can plan, right? It can anticipate. It can think. Self-awareness can decide to not walk in the park after dark because it might be dangerous, or to come in out of the rain. You know, self-awareness can direct without having fear. So that is what you use when you're in this state of point consciousness that I talk about. And I say when you're in this state of point consciousness, you have left all of your senses behind, you've left your ego, you've left your fear, you're just a point of consciousness floating in the void. And then people say, well, okay, I'm just a point of consciousness floating in the void, I can't do anything because my intellect's gone now. I'm just a point of consciousness floating in the void. You're still aware. You can direct. You have an intent, and you can use that intent. Getting rid of ego doesn't mean becoming a robot. Okay, I'm trying to help with the confusion with this concept of ego. So sure, you can plan. Let's say for an example, you decide that you want to get education. So you go to high school, then you decide to go to college, then you decide to go to graduate school and become, say, an engineer. All right, well, that's a plan. You need a plan like that if you want to become an engineer, because you can't become an engineer unless you go through those steps. So if that's something you'd like to do, then you have to have that plan, and you can't wait to have that plan until you're already a butcher or a baker or a candlestick maker. You have to start that plan before or probably while you're in high school. So you can plan to get ready to go on to go to college to become an engineer. So we need to think, and we need to think ahead. We can analyze and we can judge without ego. Like, am I doing the right thing? What's the best choice here? See, these are judgments. This is analysis. So it's not fundamentally wrong to do analysis, to judge, to be the director with your mind. It's just we don't want it attached to fear. Because we can do the same, and it's not the things that you do with your mind that are the point. It's whether or not there's fear attached to them. That's the point. Because we could take that same sequence, like I want to go to high school, I want to go to college, I want to be in graduate school, I want to be an engineer, and we could attach that to a fear. The reason I want to do these things is because I want to make a lot of money and impress people with my knowledge. You see, that's why I want to do it. Now we've got a fear attached. The fear is I'm not very impressive and I'm not really doing much and people really don't like me and think much of me. So this is what I can do, you see, to be impressive. Okay, now that's an ego, but they're saying the same thing. See, they're going through the same process. So it's not what gets said or what gets thought or what gets felt that's important here. What's important here is the intent behind it. So the intent, if it's not attached to fear, can be a very good intent. So when you're in that point consciousness state, you can intend to heal. You can intend to travel, remote view. Do whatever it is you want to do. Find what your next step is in life. Solve your problems. There's lots of things you can do while you're in that state, and you do it by directing with your self-awareness. So do you see the kind of the difference between self-awareness, directing, and kind of an intellect in the service of that self-awareness, and an awareness, an intellect that could be in the service of fear? And one of them is terrific and the other one is not. So it's a kind of a subtle thing, because you have to look at the intent behind it, not the thing. Any particular thing might be just fine if it had a good intent, and might be not so good if it had the wrong intent. So we don't look at the fact, we look at the intent behind the fact. All right, so self-awareness is good, it's necessary. Ego is self-awareness in response to fear. And in the little picture, that turns out mostly that self-awareness becomes our intellect. Okay, so there's one other thing then I'd like to explain. We have kind of two aspects to ourself. We have what I call the intellectual level. That's what we deal with this intellect. This intellect can be fear-based or it cannot be fear-based. So we don't really say, well, the intellect's bad because it's dealing with fear all the time. Well, the intellect can get into fear when it does its ego. But the intellect can be without that fear. That's the point I made back here. Just because you're fearless doesn't mean you're stupid. The intellect can still work without the fear. Okay. So ego is defined by intent or motivation. Okay, that's kind of the idea. So what we'd like to do is get rid of that ego, get rid of that fear that causes that ego, get rid of those beliefs, let our love kind of float to the top and go from there. If we can do that, then all of our problems get easier. All of our issues, the hard things we have to deal with, the decisions we have to make, what we want to do with our life, how do we solve problems, all of that gets a lot easier. What confuses us is that fear that creates the ego, because we start thinking in terms of our ego. We start thinking in terms of, well, how can I manipulate this to come out the best way that I want it? Well, when you start thinking like that, you will almost certainly make it come out a way that is not the way you want it. Because now you're trying to manipulate stuff. And if it was just you in a world by yourself, that strategy might work. But when you're in a world with everybody else who's all trying to manipulate it to make it come out the way they want it, it becomes a problem. What you have now is this, deadlock. And you have that with your spouse, you have that with your children, you have that with your coworkers, with your boss. It's all this, because everybody wants to manipulate it to come out the way they want it. But what's good for me, the way I want it, isn't necessarily the way you want it. You see, so we struggle. And then we have these ego wars. And we fight with each other to try to get it the way we want it. That's very suboptimal social interaction. Okay. So we move to love. We move to about other. Well, if it's about you, then it's ego. So another way to look at ego is, who's it about? Is it about somebody else? Then that's a good, it's probably a 90%. If it's about somebody else, it's about a 90% that this is ego-derived. If it's, if it's about you, I got that backwards. If it's about you, there's a high probability it's ego-derived. If it's about somebody else, it may not be. Now, it still might be if it's about somebody else. If the reason that it's about somebody else is how can I manipulate you, or what should you be doing, to suit my plan, then we think, well, I'm just trying to help you out, It's because I really know how things ought to be, and I'm just trying to help you out. Therefore, what you need to do is this, and here's the book you need to read, and here's the religion you need to take, and I'm just helping you out. Well, that's not I'm helping you out at all. I'm trying to control you. I want you to be like me. I want you to agree with me because I'm right and you're wrong, so I'm helping you out. You see, that's not really about you. I don't really care about you at all. I'm saying what I'm doing is strutting my own superiority of my knowledge and my choices, and I'm helping you be superior like me. See, that's really all about me, not really about you at all. So we have to distinguish about that. Now, it can be about others of course, in a good way. And when you're about, with your children is one thing. When you tell your children don't play in the street, well, it's about you and about them, but mainly it's about them because they'll get hurt if they play in the street. You care about them. Well, you don't want them to get hurt either, so you also care about you. They're your children and you want them to do all right. So it's about both, and that's okay. There's no problem with that. But if it's manipulative and it's really about you, I want my children to grow up and become professionals. I want my daughter to become a doctor, and I want my son to become, whatever. an engineer, a physicist. That would be good. Have your sons become physicists. You know, I want something, you know, and this is what I want. They need to get good grades. They need to go to college, and you start, you know, doing this. Well, that's about you. That's not necessarily about them. And you say, oh, it's for their own good. That's still about you. It's not about them. Now, you might encourage that. You might say, don't you think it'd be neat to be a scientist? You know, don't you think it'd be neat to work in medicine? And if they say, nah, I'd rather be an airplane pilot. You know, I want to be a fireman. You see, and you say, no, 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 you can't be a fireman. You know, you need to be a doctor. That's you. That's not love. That's you trying to make them be what you want them to be. So you say, okay, if you're going to be a fireman, be a good fireman. Because what's important is that whatever you do is something you really like and you do it well. You see? And they'd go, great, I'm going to be the best fireman ever. And that's fine. Because at 6 or 7 or 8 years old, when you want to be a fireman, you know, that's a good thing to want to be. You know, that'll change on its own. You don't have to, you know, start the thumb screws, you know, too early. So we need to think about how can we optimize how can we make other people happy? How can we meet their needs? What it is that they need, and how can we help them get there? And generally, it's not by lecturing them or explaining things to them. That's typically not the way we can help them to get anywhere other than to get angry with us. It's by giving them a supportive environment so they can make good choices, and by giving them information so that they can see bigger pictures. People have a problem with the little pictures. They get stuck in little pictures. And to a 6 or 7 year old boy, being a fireman or a policeman or an automobile mechanic is like all there is in the world, because their view of reality is really small. You know, they have no idea what a scientist or a doctor or a nurse or, you know, a veterinarian, they don't know any of those things. They don't know what that stuff is. So sure, they want to be maybe they want to be a cowboy or an Indian or something too. And that's all right. But so you give them information. Well, wouldn't you like to fly airplanes? Oh yeah, that'd be cool. Well, you know, that's something else. So we can enlarge their environment. We give them a supportive environment, we give them a bigger environment, and then we basically leave them alone and let them decide what it is they want to do. And it's the same with all sorts of problems. So you want to help your mother, you want to help your husband, your wife, deal with certain things you have to deal with. It's the same thing. You give them a supportive environment where they feel safe in making choices. Because if you're afraid to make a choice because you're afraid you might do it wrong, or you're afraid you're incompetent, or you feel insecure, then you're not going to make that choice. You're just going to stay huddled up in that fear. You're not going to feel safe enough to reach out and say, well, this isn't working for me. I'd like to try something else, but I'm afraid. Give them that security that they can reach out and try something else. That's one thing you can do. And then educate. Open up a reality. Look, it's not just this or that. You know, it's not that black and white thing that you think. It's bigger than that. There's lots of other things involved. So this is kind of we talked about the fear, and the ego, of course, is obviously related to that. But these are the ways. Now, I had a couple of people at lunchtime say, well, we want to know, how do we get rid of this stuff? You know, that's really the big question, because if you could just get rid of all that fear and that ego, you know, and tell that intellect to sit down and be quiet. And the reason we tell that intellect to sit down and be quiet is not that the intellect is a bad player in this game. It's that the intellect spends almost all of its time satisfying the needs of the ego. That's what it does. The intellect spends its time justifying why the ego is really right, why you are superior, why they are inferior, you know, everything you think, why your kid ought to be a doctor. You know, they tell your intellect takes your wants, takes your ego, take your wants and needs and desires and justifies them. That's what we use our intellects for probably 90% of the time. I mean, sometimes we use it to find our lost glasses and mislaid keys, but most of the time we use it to justify our egos and our beliefs. Okay, so the intellect needs to mostly sit down and be quiet. We need to stop trying to think our way through everything. people live out of their heads, particularly left brain people tend to live out of their heads, which means they analyze everything, figure out what should I do with my intellect, then they go off and try to do that. The problem is several things. One, they're making those decisions based on just a teeny little bit of data. They're jumping to all sorts of conclusions because they don't really have enough data. Secondly, that intellect is representing their fears and their beliefs, which aren't necessarily facts at all. You know, they're just the way things they fear and the beliefs. They may not be like that at all. So we're making these decisions with our intellects when we could do better if we just took a deep breath, let go, and felt where we needed to go. Reach that place beneath the intellect that's at the being level. The being level is where you need to change, not in the intellect. It's not that you get fearless in your intellect so you don't think you're afraid of everything. It's that you get fearless at the being level. All growth starts at the being level. That's where you have to change. We discussed this earlier when a question was asked, and it said there's a difference between acting and being. You can act a very nice person. You can act like you don't have an ego. You can act like you really care, but it's different if you really do care. There's a difference between going through the motions because you think you should, or because it looks good, or for whatever other reason. And it may not be you're trying to impress anybody else, it may be just trying to impress yourself. But the change of getting rid of your fear has to happen at the being level. And what we find out is that once you get rid of that fear, you don't have an intellect. I mean, you have an intellect, you don't have an ego, and you don't really have an id and a superego. You just have one thing. You're a whole, complete being. And you don't have this part of you that happens and you don't understand it. You don't know what it is. I got asked a question some time ago. It says, tell us about that subconsciousness that's always pushing us around. It's like the devil made me do it. It's like, well, my subconscious made me do it. I really didn't want to eat that candy, but something made me do it. I'm always pushed by my needs and my wants and desires to do things. Even when my intellect says, don't do that, I do it anyway. Okay, well, once you let go of the fear, once you give up your addictions, you don't have an ego and a subconscious. Your awareness covers all of it. There isn't any part of you that's running programs that you don't know about and you're not aware about. You become a whole person, not a fragmented superego, ego, and id. That fragmentation is a result of fear and the beliefs. That's what fragments us. We take that fear stuff and we wall it off so we don't have to deal with it. And that's where a lot of that subconscious, that pushes us around and makes us do things we really know we shouldn't, comes from. So again, we get rid of the fear, the ego goes away, and we're a whole being without a subconscious manipulating us behind the scenes. And we become responsible for what we do, and our decisions are clear. So that's where we're trying to get to. And we mentioned that you deal with fears and every fear is different, and I will give you some very basic things like we've talked about. How do I get rid of fear? With courage. First, you kind of have a desire to get rid of the fear. You really want to get rid of it. Some of us say, yeah, I'd like to get rid of that, but you're not really dealing with it. That's just the intellect giving you a story. That's the intellect convincing you that, oh sure, we'll get rid of that someday, tomorrow, we'll start working on that, or that kind of a thing. You're not really serious. So first you have to really get serious. You want to change. You want to grow up. You want to get hold of these fears and beliefs, and you really need to get rid of them because that's important to growing up. Otherwise, we just sit here in this stew and keep stewing, and we live in a soap opera, and it's this constant contention all the time throughout our lives. Live with it and die with it. It's either that or grow up. Okay, so once you get serious, and most of you are serious or you wouldn't be here. Only the serious end up here. Once you get serious, then you have to get up your courage and say, there's a fear here. And this fear is not a small thing. You know, this fear is a big thing. But you have to find it. What is the fear? Because if you don't know what it is, it's really hard to deal with it. You can deal with it without knowing what it is. It's not impossible to do. It's just a harder process. An easier process is to find it. Once you find it, you need to use your intellect now to work against the fear. Say, I'm not going to let that fear move me. I'm not going to let that fear push me. If the fear says, that I need to be a bully because I'm afraid that people won't like me or don't like me, so I'm going to kind of get big and loud and everything, and people have to deal with me. Well, say, I'm not going to go there. And you have to work at it, and you will find it's very difficult. You'll try and you'll fail. You'll try and it'll work a little bit, and then you're right back. Don't say, I can't do it. You really have to be committed to do it. It won't work any other way. So I'm not saying that something is easy. Sounds easy, right? Easy to say, hard to do. Oh, get rid of your fear, step one. Now we'll all go into step two, right? That's step two, get rid of all your beliefs. Now we're all perfect, nothing but love. Easy to say, hard to do. The only way you can do it is you really have to want to do it seriously. You have to be committed to it and spend the time to dig out that ego, find the fear, get rid of the fear. That can take months, years of working on it. What you'll find though, when you start uncovering these, you'll start finding all sorts of them. I have lots and lots of people that'll send me email and they said, I didn't even think I had any fears, but now I find out my whole life is defined by my fear. Everything I do is based on fear. I'm fear-driven in all my choices. I'm ego-driven in all my choices. And that's a common thing, it's a common place to come to. Don't get overwhelmed by that. Because it's sort of like throwing up the hands and saying, this is too much. But just pick one and work on it. Pick the one that's most important to you and work on it. And pick the next one and work on it. Know that it's going to take you months. But the good news is that, like anything else, you get better at it as you work on it, and you'll get better quickly. The first fear you wrestle with will probably take you the longest. The second one will take half as long. The third one will take half as long as that. Pretty soon it becomes easy to spot them and get rid of them. But the first ones are the hard ones. So you need to be tough and work hard on those fears. And everybody's are different. The things that you're going to have to deal with are going to be very different for every person in here. And how you deal with them will be very different. What does it mean to have courage, to deal with? Does that mean that you're, not afraid to drive your car, during rush hour? What does it mean? And what are the things that you should not be doing? Not, because being smart says don't do it. It's not that this is really a fear-based decision. This is an intelligence-based decision. Don't drive your car during rush hour. Oh, but you have to. It's important for your job, you see. Well, now it's important to deal with the fear. So it's a balance between what's being intelligent and what's being, just not being stupid, and what's necessary. That's why I can't tell you a prescription for everybody to use, because everybody's an individual here. Everybody needs to find their own fears and process them and deal with them in their own way. It's a very personal thing. I can just give you general hints like you have to be committed. It takes courage. It isn't easy. You have to keep working on it, and the process gets easier and easier as you go. I can tell you those things because that's kind of true for everybody. But you need a serious program. And I've had a lot of people who have heard me say these words, and they go, yeah, that's right, and then they go away and nothing happens. Because most of the time, people really don't want to put that much work into change. And they're really not that committed. And it sounds good, but they're more at the intellectual level. They get the information at the intellectual level, but they're not transferring it down to the being level, you see. And if it stays at the intellectual level, then all you'll learn is to learn that you are afraid and that you are fear-based, but you won't do anything about it because change has to be at the being level. So that's You know, it's just a fact. The hard work is avoided most of the time. We say, well, I'm not so bad off. I'm doing all right. You know, I'll have a few beers and I'll feel better. You know, that kind of an attitude that you can deal with it some other way with actually not dealing with it. Okay? And it's true, we are addicted to our fears. We've generated patterns in the way we interact with the world because of our fears. We have whole patterns and lifestyles and things that we do and relationships that are all based on our fears. So we get rid of our fears that are at the root of a lot of the things we do. Our whole life feels like it's coming unglued. Things are starting to change. You become a different person. That relationship changes. The way you see where you work, the way you see what you do, the clothes that you wear, everything might change because it's going to unsettle your world. If you're committed, that'll be a good change. You'll like it. If you're not, change will frighten you and you will go back because we're herd animals and we like the familiar. We like the repetition. We like to moo when everybody else moos because that's what herd animals do. So you have to be aware of that. These are obstacles. Easy to say, hard to do. You're going to meet resistance in yourself. And your intellect is going to be trying to justify leaving everything just the way it is. That part of your fear-based intellect is saying, that's all right, you're okay. You don't need this, it's not your problem, it's their problem. You know, go have another beer, you'll feel better. This is what your intellect will be telling you. Nobody else is doing this. Is everybody else doing this? No. You know, well, why should you do it? You know, again, let's move with the herd. You'll get that. So it takes persistence. All right, that's kind of the outline of it and how you know, what it is and how you get rid of it, but it's very personal, how you get rid of it. And you don't get rid of fear A the same way you get rid of fear B. One fear, you may just jump into it, face it, you know, eyeball to eyeball and say, give me your best shot. And then when it doesn't hurt all that much, you say, ha, paper tiger, I've beaten you. You know, it may be just as easy as that. And some other ones may be like dragging yourself through hell. You know, it may be, this hurts, this scares me, nobody will like me anymore, you know, etc. Because you have all these structures built up so people will like you because you're afraid they won't. Well, if you deal with that fear, you're not sure whether they'll like you or not anymore because they won't see the structure you build up, they'll see you. And is that okay? You see, well, that's the fear. It has to be okay. You have to say, well, if they don't like me, they don't like me. That's all right, I'll get by. If they don't like me, I'll go to other places. And what you'll find out is if the people don't like you, you're probably much better off someplace else. You know, tricking people into liking you by being clever is generally not productive. And that's true with all of these fears. The things that you achieve through fear management tend to be false achievements. They're not really helpful to you at all. And you get rid of the fear and become real and genuine and authentic and deal with people the way it is. The ones that don't like you. Sorry, I don't like you either. You know, it's that sort of thing. And it's not a good relationship. The ones that do like you, well, there's a lot of potential there. So it just sorts out all by itself. And it may not be the way you want it to sort out, you see. It may be that person that you really would like to like you. Maybe it turns out that you're really not that compatible and you're forcing it to work. So these are just some things to think about. It's up to you to be clever enough and have enough energy and enough oomph to get the job done. But it's important. That's job number one. All right, questions? You have a hand over here, Wagner.
Good afternoon. If when we're working on ourselves and attempting to face our fears, are we allowed a nudge from others? Because sometimes you realize something's not quite right because of something that someone else did or said or might have even pointed out to you. If you take that away and try and work on that, is that all okay?
Oh yes, you can get nudged from others. There's another thing you can do. Not only can you take nudges from others, but You can ask the larger consciousness system to help you. When you go into your meditation, you can say, here's a fear I'm trying to deal with. I need help. Here's my problem. Are there ways that you can point out to me to help or go about it? And you will find that you will get help. The larger conscious system is really trying to help you succeed all the time. And if you're sincere about that, you'll notice that things will just sort of work out in a way, synchronicity that'll help you with it. So if you have this intent and you kind of broadcast this intent, then not only will that trigger other people in your environment to give you nudges, but the whole system will work for you. So you do have somebody on your side that way. That's yourself. That's your intent modifying reality to the point that what you intend comes true, gets manifested. You see, that's you creating your own reality. Yes, that's an important part of going about it. That's why we start with the idea you have to be serious, because that's where your intent comes from.
Because for me, in part, things have been happening recently, and you've just described exactly that. And it's kind of, that's a bit scary, because suddenly it's like in a situation, there's this answer, that answer, the other answer. Someone walks across and says a word, and here you have an answer. And it's been absolutely overwhelming and wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's because your intent to make that change was genuine. You were ready. You see, and until you're ready, nothing much happens. When you are ready, advertise that I'm ready. I want to experience this or that. I need to deal with this fear. I need to outgrow this problem. I'm in a dysfunctional situation here. I need help. And you'll get help, but be ready for it, because if you're not ready, the help will come and you'll go, oh, I don't want that. You see, because it conflicts with your fear, it conflicts with your belief, you don't want to do that. And you pass the opportunity off. So you need to be ready. You were ready, so it does. It just comes to you, doesn't it? It falls right in front of you. And
amazing.
Yeah.
Not in every situation, but
right.
Things that are like they have a bright light on them and you go, oh, what just happened there? It's wonderful.
Yeah, that happens to you when you're ready. Some people will say, well, I've never had I never had anything paranormal happen to me. I've never gotten a message telepathically. I've never been out of body. I've never had an instance where anything out of the normal ever happened to me at all. Well, that's probably because you're not ready. Those things, you're not open to them. If they did happen, you would deny them and claim that nothing ever happened. You see? So being ready and willing is really the first step. Okay?
Yeah, hi Tom. When you look at cultures, say, like the Roman Empire or the Mayan culture that have sort of risen and fallen due to, say, fear and their ego, in many ways you can see the same thing happening today with our population and the media. It's just you look at the news and everything's about fear and ego. At what point would the larger consciousness system say, well, this PMR, it's just in a state of de-evolution and it's just going to click, say, a reset button, or it's just not worth running it?
Yeah, I don't think we're likely to get to that point, that it gets that bad. You see, the system works on probability. Probability works on potential. What's the potential here? Is there potential to do better? Is there potential to grow up? Could this change? Maybe not in the near term, but in the far term. In the next 100 years, could we do better? That sort of thing. So as long as the system finds potential here for us, then we'll be here chugging along. I don't think it's likely that the system will say, this is hopeless, These humans don't have a clue, They're all in this soap opera and it's just, turn that off, Let's start over. It's a possibility. Digital systems can do that. They can start over. They say, let's go back 300 years, and start this thing again. It's all in them. It's all in memory. It's all in data. You know, you can do that in a simulation. You can roll time backwards and say, all right, let's start at t equals, 3,000 seconds, right? And you can go back and start it again at that point and say, well, let's hope they make better decisions this time. But in general, I don't think that's likely. I think that's a real long shot because there's lots of potential. Yes, we're in kindergarten, and yes, there's so much fear and ego around that we're all suffering from it. But look at how many people came out here today. You see, there's lots of people who are trying to outgrow that fear. There's lots of people trying to do good things. There's lots of charities out there trying to help people. There's lots of people who care. And even though, they care, and they still have fears. They still have things. We're not all, it's not 100% one or the other. It's like either you're total fear or you get rid of all the fear. We're a mixed bag of fear. We're a mixed bag of need and love. Our relationships are a mixture of need and love. We'll talk about relationships tomorrow. But, we're mixed through all of this. But that gives us potential. We have potential to grow up. And if you look at history over the long term, go back to the 1200s, the 1300s, you can see we made a lot of progress in a lot of ways. Some ways we're just like that, some ways we're like the caveman, in the jungle. Other ways though, we've grown quite a bit. We've learned. Probably 80% of that is superficial. It's working out of our intellect. It's not down at this level. Civilization is a thin veneer, right? We obey the laws because we're afraid of getting caught and doing the penalty, not because we think it's right. So that's part of it. But all in all, I see progress. I see progress, even over the last 10 or 20 years. We have new tools now that completely change everything, like the internet, right? Most of us wouldn't be here if there was no internet, right? The internet's what netted us all together. These tools didn't exist. Even a couple of decades ago, they weren't around. So things are always changing. There's always new variables, and I think there's always a lot of potential. So I wouldn't worry about the system just getting so dysfunctional it doesn't work. The system is a reflection of us, like we said this morning. Our leaders are us in a more powerful position. Our leaders are representative of the people that they lead. That tends to be the way it is. That's the way we are. So we get what we deserve, pretty much. We just need to deserve better. We need to grow up, and it starts with us. But I've seen, in just the last decade, I've seen a huge difference in how many people are interested in seeking out truth, trying to find out what's the big picture here, what am I doing here, what makes sense. And that's become better just in a few decades. We go just 2 decades back and nobody much was interested. So things are changing. I talk about virtual reality, and now, in another decade or two, 75% of the of the whole world's population will have spent hundreds of hours playing virtual reality games. Well, that wasn't true, before. We've got opportunities now we didn't have. Okay, another question?
I'm still a little puzzled about the origin of ego and fear. I mean, you said it's not necessarily part of the PMR of our world, where you have hunger or thirst or being afraid of dying. But why is ego so connected to awareness?
Ego so connected
to awareness, to consciousness. Why is it?
Well, ego is self-awareness responding to fear. So when the self-awareness is afraid, has needs, wants, and desires, is afraid it's not going to get what it needs, then that's the ego. It's that self-awareness responding to fear is what we call ego. So it is our self-awareness, but not necessarily all of our self-awareness has to be responding to ego. Again, we can be a mixed bag. So that's what generates the ego. So here we are, and we're in this environment. There's all kinds of scary things out here. So our ego has a lot to be afraid of. So we build a lot of walls. We adapt as best we can, and we kind of live this way. So here we are, motivated by fear.
But if you're not living in this world, where if you're living in a non-physical reality where you don't have hunger, thirst, you're not afraid of dying, what kind of fears would then remain?
You still have fears then too. And what the fears that remain are generally fears of competency, fears about evolution. You have fears, you have other social systems, even in the non-physical. They don't have systems that are as physical as this, but they still have beings there that inhabit that kind of live there, that don't get into these virtual reality trainers like we do, and they just live in that state. And they have all kinds of fears. Imagine, the quintessential nerd sitting in his room who never goes out and deals with the world through his computer. Is that some place that would generate fear? He's not out in the world. He's not going to get eaten by any tigers. He's not going to get crashed in a car. He doesn't talk to anybody, sees anybody. His food's slid under the door, by his mother who's given up on him a long time ago. And he's just doing his thing. But there's all kinds of fear just in information, right? Maybe he's into the fear that's all over the internet. He might be into conspiracies. He may be fearful for his characters in World of Warcraft. Who knows? There's lots of fears. Just because you're not interactive in a virtual reality doesn't mean that there's nothing to fear. Fears can be generated internally as well. Fears can be imagined. And an imagined fear is as good as any kind of fear. Matter of fact, most of our fears are imagined. Most of them are not real.
So you would say consciousness automatically comes with fear. It's like if it's a young, fresh, new consciousness, it's always connected with fear.
It's going to have fear. I mean, that's the point. It evolves to become fearless. So when it's not very evolved, it has this proclivity toward fear. All right? And it will find something to fear. Did you notice that about people who always have something to complain about? If you take away their complaint, they find something else. This is the worst thing in the world, and they complain, and suddenly that gets solved. Doesn't solve the person being a complainer at all. They find something else to complain about. Well, it's like that with fear. If you're a fearful person and everything that's scary in your life is taken away, you'll complain about, or you'll be fearful about something else. You'll find something to fill up that fear, even if it's just your imagination. In other words, until you've evolved, fear comes natural to you. You generate it.
Well, just building on this idea of fear, I mean, this is kind of getting to what my question is as we're evolving, individuals evolving, or whatever we are these fears designed for us to help us? I mean, some have some fears and others have different kinds of fears, and are they designed specifically for us to transcend and evolve? Because I know the apparently in Egypt with the initiates, that was a big thing. They put them through all the paces to have them transcend those fears. But
well, yes and no. Depends on how you think about it and how we make up the metaphors. In a sense, it's designed in the sense that that's what this reality is about. This reality is about interaction. Okay? In interaction and feedback, you have to deal with your fears. Your fears create your reality. You manifest your fears, so you not only get to deal with them in your head, then you get to deal with them out here in the physical world. So in that sense, it is kind of set up that we come here to deal with fears. But our particular fears, no. It's not like, you're set up to have a particular fear. You have the particular fears you come up with are things, could be left over from a past life, which you might say is set up, but mostly not. It's just as you have bounced around inside this reality. You've interacted with people, you've read things, you've heard things, and in as much as you are fearful, you find things to fear. So you develop your own set of fears. That's why everybody's fears are a little different. Now, if you wanted to have a get rid of fear training course, we could do that too, like you say. You know, we could have a training course where all of us are, you know, put in a sensory deprivation tank where there's nothing in there but your mind. That's sort of a forcing point consciousness on you. You see, you go in a sensory deprivation tank, that means you float, you're buoyant to neutral. So you just float, not on top, not on the bottom, you just float. The temperature is exactly your skin temperature. It's totally black, there's nothing to see. It's totally quiet, there's nothing to hear. You can't quite get rid of touch and feeling because you can kind of feel the water on you a little bit, but if you don't move, everything is still and nothing changes. That's a sensory deprivation tank, okay? Your senses all reading 0 because there's nothing there to sense. What happens when people are in there? They tend to find their fears. They start to hallucinate. And their fears come out, and many people only can spend about 2 minutes in such a tank without, you know, screaming, "Let me out," because they find themselves in their fears in there once they free their mind. The same happens often with meditators. People who begin to meditate start, when they actually get good enough results in their meditation that they really are letting go, they run into their fears and they stop the meditation process because the fear has them stymied. So that's a problem that can happen, that you do run into your fears. And if you let your fears stop you, then that's the end of the process. People going out of body, when they try to do that, often have a lot of fear. And many, they can't get past that fear. You know, and often we have fear tests. That's we get put in dreams, right? We get put in scary situations in dreams just to see how we react with our fear. So these are, yeah, so the system does test us some, but mostly we come up to our own fears. We generate them ourselves. They're our personal fears.
Hi, I would like to ask about something what to me appears as some kind of I don't know how to explain. I found that most of the fears comes with the software. I mean, software is the body and the mind, which is very logical, very mechanical, and works by itself. We can say subconsciously. And I can find a point where I, for example, not focus on being here or experiencing not even body, just being here, being with the body, in the body, but not being related to it, just seeing like, it is how it is, as it is, and then the fear just go away, whatever it is. But when my attention goes to the body starts to work by itself, just producing just kind of vibration, which gives me the sensation of, okay, I need to be afraid of something, and then I come up with anything. It's like whatever. So it looks like I can separate myself from a mechanical body, mechanical mind, which is just like an engine, and just be like you were saying, void. But then it looks like the fear is not there. So fear comes with when I try to operate the body. So it looks like I'm working on the machine to make it better, like with a car, to just improve it. But then I have to deal with the limitation of this car, right? So the fear is something something doesn't work well in the engine. So maybe let's fix a little bit. So it looks to me like, I know maybe it's not true, but like I'm part of the body, but really I'm operating the body. But then so what the body is? But body is something. The body, I mean the reality and everything. So those rules defined us in the same time, or we defining rules just play around? I don't know. So
it sounds like if your fear is attached to the body, where your fear is somehow body-centered or body-attached, that is a belief, I would say, of yours. That's a connection. You've somehow made that connection. You've put them there. You've taken these fears and you've connected them to the body. Now why? I don't know. It could be because it's a good way to deal with them. You know, well, I have this fear. I really don't have any fear out here. It's at the body. It may be a tool that you're using. Fears aren't naturally just connected to the body. That's not just like the way things work. It's something you're doing to make that connection, and it may be part of your strategy of dealing with your fears. One of the tools that I've heard used successfully is when people start going out of body. The first thing they do is they imagine this big strong trunk, big steel strong trunk, and they open up the trunk, and the first thing they do is stuff all their fears and concerns and worries and everything gets stuffed in the trunk. Then the trunk lid gets slammed shut and a lock gets put on it. Now they can go off without all that fear and with all those problems anymore. Well, what are we doing? We're tricking ourselves, right? We're setting up tools to help us focus our minds on other things. So that trunk is just a tool to let those fears go. All right, I'm not going to solve my fear problems now, but I don't want to deal with them either. So they go in the trunk. Well, they go in the body. They go someplace. So my guess is you've made an association between the fear and the body. Something about the body and the fear seem to go together in your mind, so you've made that connection. And that's why you're having that. But it's not necessary. That's it's your own metaphor, so to speak. And you can change that metaphor so it doesn't work that way. But my guess is that metaphor has some value to you. You wouldn't have created it. So you may find some resistance to changing it. But it's just a metaphor that you should be able to change. Nothing fundamental about the body and fear. It's all mental. The body doesn't really exist. It's not like the body is the place where the fear is, and that once you get into the bigger reality, there is none. But if that's a belief, then a metaphor that stores fear in the body would work. You see? So it's probably something like that, and nothing fundamental.
Hi, Tom. Tom, I'd like to ask you a question about how we self-deceive ourselves. So when we, as a subset of the superset, agree to manifest in human form, we agree that we won't take a memory of our true nature with us. And that's the first deception. So then we're born into a family that probably is in high entropy. Our community is in high entropy. And then we start a process of indoctrination about religious beliefs, political beliefs, sexual beliefs, etc. So we agreed to dig this enormous hole that it creates fear. And now we're told that it's only through pain and suffering that we can evolve. So that would suggest that the superset requires aspects of itself in the form of a subset to actually evolve. So my question is the necessity of deception.
Okay. It's not true that we can only evolve through pain and suffering. It is true that we mostly do evolve through pain and suffering, but that's because of us. If we could evolve through, joy and peace and that sort of thing, then that would work fine. It's a matter of motivation. What motivates us? What gets us to change? What gets us to think, I need to change this. This is not working for me. I need to do something different. Generally, the thing that is most successful at getting us to want to grow up is pain and suffering. So we kind of choose that ourselves by default. As we do grow up, our ability to grow without the pain and suffering increases. So this pain and suffering thing is more of a beginning thing here in the elementary school. It's not so much later. Later you can kind of see things. Patterns kind of fall into shape and you go, oh, I see that. And you change and you grow. You don't actually have to be hit over the head, with a bat before you get the picture. You don't deny. You're more open to things. So the pain and suffering is our own. We're thick-headed, and unless we feel the pain and suffering, then we're okay. We don't need to change anything. So that's where the pain and suffering comes in. That's because of us. That's because we're so thick-headed. That's what motivates us. It's not that the system requires pain and suffering. It's that we require pain and suffering in order to, get along. Now, it's not that the deception, I wouldn't call it deception so much as I would that's the way it's the way the model works. The way you get into this reality isn't so much by deception, is that you agree to accept the constraints of a particular player, which will, like our body, as an infant, you say, all right, I'm going to accept these constraints. Now the constraints are defined by this simulation. We talk about the big digital bang. We're in the digital computer. We had a bunch of energy in a ball. We let it evolve. We end up with a universe, and we end up with our planet and our sun, and here we are. So all this has evolved in this simulation, if you will. So we have this simulation, and it evolved according to a rule set, and that rule set provides the structure so that it can evolve, and it also provides the constraints. So one of the constraints is that I can't fly, because these little hands, and my muscle structure and my weight just doesn't allow it. So that's part of the rule set, because I evolved this way. Birds can fly. The rule set allows them to fly because their bones are hollow, they're light, and they have these big, light, feathery wings that work. So we have all these constraints. We have a constraint on our thinking as well, and our understanding, because our virtual brain can only process so much data, do so many things, can only juggle so much information at a time. So that's a constraint. We get hit in the head with a rock, and we may add constraints to what we can think about and what we can do with our minds, because now we have brain damage. You see, so we agree to abide by the rule set. So we pick a character, and we say, all right, I'm going to abide by the constraints of this being in this simulation. And you do. And it's the same way you do a character in World of Warcraft. If you were playing World of Warcraft, you'd go in and you say, well, what is it that you want to be? I'm going to be an elf. I'm going to be a whatever. I'm going to be a barbarian. And with that comes certain characteristics, the culture, if you will, that lays on its characteristics. And then you get to, you have to learn how to be that, various characteristics and how it does. Well, we're sort of like that too. So we're born, we're physical body now, and we don't have a clue how to interpret the data. We get this data, and we don't know what the data means, but we learn as an infant, that we have, and we learn before we're born, because even when you're in utero, we're interacting with the mother, with the father, with the sounds, various things. So we're taking in this data, and we're learning what to do with it. Eventually, we get so clever, we interpret it just the way it is here. We see each other as individual bodies. We see, all the data that we're getting gets interpreted just like this, because that's how we learn to interpret it. When we get this certain data, this is what comes out. And it's a multiplayer game, so the computer takes care of, if you do something, if you talk, I hear it. Okay, because that's the way it works in a multiplayer game. So it's not so much by deceit as it is just the way the game's played. When you go in and play your elf, there's a separation between you and your elf. And it's not that your elf is being deceived, about you, is that your elf has limitations, and it can only do certain things. And you can only play it to do those things. So I wouldn't, deceit sounds almost like a negative word to me. It's not really so much that, this is the way the game works. The game creates a break between you and your elf. You and your elf don't have the same mind, because that elf is limited in what it can do. It has a rule set that it has to work within. It can't run but so fast and jump but so high either, but it can probably jump higher than you can. But you see, it's got to abide by its own rule set. And it's not that you're deceiving your elf. Your elf is your avatar, and it does do what you say. It does jump when you hit the jump button. It does run, or it does fight, or it does whatever it does because you tell it to. So it is your elf, and it is kind of you, and it's playing the way you would play if you were that elf, because you're at the controls, giving it all its directions. But now with us, we also have consciousness, and we have free will. So we come here, and it's not that somebody's, we're not hand puppets with somebody controlling everything we say. It's not like that. We get here as a piece of consciousness, and we're aware, and our job is to interact. We start with a certain amount of quality of consciousness, a certain amount of evolution. That's where we start, and from there on, we learn how to interpret the data, we interact, we grow, and we have opportunities to further evolve. And yes, the system is about evolution, and that's what it's doing, because the system has basically two long-term choices, and that is evolve or die. That's all you can do. The stuff that's in between, like evolve a little, and de-evolve a little, is unstable. So eventually it is either evolve or die. So this system, this digital information system that ran the simulation, that created our virtual reality so that we could interact and get feedback so that we could evolve more efficiently, then yes, and that's our job. It is trying to evolve, and that's why we get all the help we need. That's why we have synchronicity.
So the elf is our servant, yet in ignorance or fear, we think it's the master.
Yeah, we think it is. We think that the physical is all there is, and that we're in charge, and that we're the master. But basically, we're a piece of consciousness that's here trying to evolve. Now, that consciousness that, let's say, we're only a piece of that consciousness. That consciousness still has awareness in another virtual reality, perhaps two. That's a possibility, or it could have two consciousnesses here. But that consciousness is not perfect. It's not like we have the perfect aware consciousness that is all peace and love, that has this projection here for entertainment. It's not like that. Our job is real. And when we come here, we come with the quality that consciousness has. That's all the quality that consciousness has. It's not sitting there with supreme knowledge, and here we are, the stupid little puppet in in the virtual reality. We are basically at the same level it is. We're it. And we're trying to grow up. And the next time it has an incarnation, maybe it'll start at just a little higher level. But it's not knowledgeable and brilliant and loving while we're struggling out here. So it's not that it's really the master in that sense. We're it. We're a portion of it. And everything it's got, we've got. And we're using it all, trying to get more, trying to do better, trying to lower our entropy. So it's that sort of thing. So we're not really, it's the master and we're the puppet so much as we're it. It's us. It's just that we've constrained ourselves to this experience. And we've done that because this is an experience with feedback, and we can learn faster here. It's a much better place to learn than a place where it's just data being sent back and forth between, conscious systems without any feedback, without any traction. We come here, that's why the virtual reality was created in the first place, because evolution wasn't doing so well otherwise without this kind of feedback. So we get in this virtual reality, we interact with each other, we have this clever thing that we create our own reality. So if we're kind of low level in our evolution, we live in a low level kind of place with all kinds of nasty things going on. That's because that's what we deserve. That's where we are. That's really where we fit in. If we were suddenly placed in a love and peace place that was very different than the way we are, we'd be fish out of water. We really wouldn't belong there. It would be harder for us to evolve there in the sense that making choices of our own free will. We may just follow the other people. Oh, these are all more grown than I am. I'll just do what they do. Now you're acting. You're not really changing at the being level, you see. You're just following somebody else. You say, well, I'd be easy. I'd be love to be in a peace, all peace and love. Everybody there was just peace and love, and I just fit right in, and I'd be peace and love too. Not if you didn't grow up. You might act like it because you were acting like everybody else, but would you be it if you hadn't actually developed to it, you see? We're here because this is where we belong. This is what we've made. This is what we've evolved, and that's why we're in it. And it will change as we change. As we grow up, the whole infrastructure will grow up. The quality of your institutions will grow up. Your interactions with people, all of that stuff will go up with us. But we have to do the work, because otherwise we're just acting, we're just pretending. And that's the trouble with those people who are just exchanging data. It's so easy to pretend. Oh, they type into their computer, I weigh 400 pounds. I work in the Pacific Northwest chopping down trees. I'm a lumberjack. I'm 45 years old and whatever, and I'm really a 12-year-old girl sitting in an apartment in New York City. You see, there's no traction there. And you send that to somebody. What can they do with it? Oh, wow, how's life out in the woods? She says, oh, fine, but the mosquitoes are bad. What are you learning? See, there's no traction. You can't get a hold of that and grow from it at the being level. It's just too hard. So it's slow. So you come here and wham, you're, what you are is what you get. And you struggle with it, and everybody else struggles with it, and we struggle together, but you can make real progress here. That's hard to make anyplace else. So it's not really that this is some tricky game that we get deceived into playing, and we're the puppet, and and our other consciousness is the puppeteer, and it's all for somebody's amusement. It's, this is a real job to grow and to evolve, and it's an important job because the system is evolving through us, because we're part of it. So it's not really a game that we're in. Of course, I always use the analogy, of a computer game, but it's really not a game. This game's for real. This is a serious game. Yes, we're virtual, but the consciousness system is fundamental, and it's real, and it needs to evolve. And this is the fast track. Coming in here, believe it or not, this place with all of its warts and ugliness, this is the fast track, because this is where the challenges are. And this is where, if you do it wrong, you get slapped. You get bitten by the results of your bad choices. And we're not too clever, so we do bad choices, and then we get bitten, and we do it again, and we get bitten, and we do it again because we're slow learners. But eventually, you get it. And fortunately, this is not a time test. You have all the time. You have all the time that you need. And when you run out of the time on this one, you go try another one, because you need lots of time. Because evolution is an open-ended cumulative process. So it just keeps chugging along. So it is really a serious, it's a serious process we're in, and it's not really a deceiving process as it is, it's a real thing. If we weren't doing this, then the whole thing wouldn't be evolving. And that would not be good. It either evolves or it goes away. And when it goes away, we all go away. And then there's nothing.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Mm-hmm. Finally got that mic, didn't you? You've been trying for a long time.
Last year I was here, it was the same thing. I guess it's
Okay.
I have a few questions. I don't know if I'm going to be able to ask them all right now. Maybe I'll just ask one or two. One is going back to the gentleman a few questions ago who said, where does fear really come from? Mm-hmm. And I was starting to think that if the larger consciousness system basically evolves to the point of creating PMRs in order to deal with fear, mm-hmm. where did it really initially come from? I just can't figure that out,
Well, the larger consciousness system has been evolving for a long time too, right? And it may have gone through its own stages of fear and things. We're part of that system. Okay, so what happens is that we have this whole system, and it's evolving. It's growing up as we grow up. So it's a part of us. And if there is fear, if it isn't love, if there's fear, then there's going to be ego. There's going to be these problems. So the system is trying to evolve itself. The system isn't a perfect system. It's a real system. It's just trying to do better, trying to turn more bits into functional bits.
So it is kind of a mystery, though. I mean, where did that fear really, from the very beginning, where did that come from to begin with?
Fear?
Yeah.
Well, if you are not evolved, fear is a natural thing. I mean, fear just starts because here you are, and you're in awareness, and you're just floating there in an awareness.
No, because it kind of seems as though it's largely the PMR environment that creates a lot of that fear, correct?
Well, the PMR environment gives you a place where you can express that fear. It's not that it creates it. It gives you an opportunity to express it. It's not so much that it creates it. You come with a proclivity toward that fear. Okay.
And another one is, I guess, related to that, is I just get a sense that when you have a PMR experience here, I get the sense that you're more prone to leaving it with more fear than you came in, though.
No, well, if you do, you're evolving.
I know, but it's kind of because of all the experiences you could have. Like even that example that you often give of having a child see his parents murdered in front of him or something like that, then you leave with so much more fear. And how is that exactly?
You might. Well, the point is that is how you deal with the fear. And there are random components. It's not a button down. It's not a planned place. This is not everything is planned. That would be a deterministic reality. There's a lot that's not planned here. So things happen, and you may have a setback. You may just happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, and you might have a setback. Somebody else might be at the right place at the right time and get a boost. It's not that everybody is following a script. There's a lot of variability. That's why it takes a lot of lifetimes. Sometimes you end up in a place where growth seems to be easier for you. It just hits you right. Everything hits together, and you merely make a lot of progress. And maybe another lifetime it doesn't. But all that works itself out, because if you only got one lifetime, then that would be too bad. You got a bad start. Sorry, but it's not like that. You can have lots of bad starts and still do all right as an entity, because you're doing this over and over and over again. So you get a long sample, you get a lot of samples out of that random page.
The sense that I get is just there's so much more opportunity for creating fear than for actually dealing with it. This whole reality is about survival, which in itself is so much about fear. Just the birth process itself is so traumatic and fearful, and it's just instilling so many fears that you later got to deal with. It's always easier to move toward fear than it is to move away from it. It's always easier to destroy than it is to build. It's always easier to create entropy than it is to reduce it. That's true. There's that natural bias, and if everything was random, the whole thing would fall apart in a jiffy, because it is easier. Creating disorder, destruction is a lot simpler than building something. But the difference is that we have awareness and we have free will, and our job here is to make choices that build rather than destroy. So yes, we have an environment where there's a lot of destruction going on, but we're here to make choices to the contrary. And if we don't, then... But overall, let's say per average, you would say that an entity that has a lifetime experience here, leaving it in general has decreased entropy.
No, I don't think so. I think most entities actually do better than that. There is a lot of fear, but there's a lot of kindness too. Yes, you see a lot of fear in the world. You see a lot of dysfunction, especially if you're still watching news. You see lots and lots of dysfunction and fear and terrible things going on, but you don't see, because it's not interesting news, all the good things that are going on. There's lots of people, who love and care and are doing things, and most of us are like that. Yes, we have fears, but part of us is love. You see, part of us is there. It's not that we're all just these negative, evil people. We're not. We're trying. We want to learn. We want our children to have a better life than we do. We love. We care. We help people. We see somebody out on the street having problems, and we ask them, can I help you? Find your way or something. That's because we care. So there's lots of generous things going on, and I think that We don't see a lot of it because it doesn't make the news. We don't see so much, but in each of our own personal lives, there's a lot of that going on. And it's the same with everybody. Even the guy that comes home and, you know, kicks the dog, he probably during the day does a few things that are helpful, that, you know, make his boss happy, you know, or whatever. Now, if he's just miserable all the time, he'll probably leave with, you know, lower quality than he came in with because he's just a miserable individual. But that's not the way most of us are. Most of us don't want to live like that. So most of us are a mixed bag. And I think in general, there's more good than bad.
Yeah, so in your view, there's a higher probability of, let's say, an individuality, unit of consciousness incarnating here, and after one lifetime leaving here with decreased entropy. You would say
with decreased entropy.
It's a higher probability that that will be the case.
I think it's a higher probability that will be the case, but I think the amount of decrease is about that big. We're slow learners, so it takes a long time for the whole thing to build up. Because like I say, some incarnations, you know, are better than others. Some you may gain a little, some you may lose a little, but on the whole, on the average, I think we are slowly gaining on it. That we are doing that, and that the average person does leave here a little better than what he came in. And that has to do with our personal interactions, our personal relationships. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. I know it doesn't seem like that sometimes, but there is a lot of goodness and love here. Yeah.
My question is about fear and meditation. When we do a lot of meditation and we get better and better at it, when we go deeper and deeper into meditation, we may find ourselves in a situation in which we have to stop because we feel fear about what we will find. How can prevent fear from spoiling our meditation?
Okay, that happens a lot. That's a very common thing, that meditation gets to a point where it gets blocked by fear. It happens almost 100% of the time in those people that are trying to learn to go out of body. You know, they almost always run into fear blocks. Meditation, maybe about 50% of the time people run into fear blocks. What you have to do when you get to that point that something fearful comes up, you have to look for the fear. And what is that fear? For the most of the time, and not all of the time, is, everybody has their own different answer, but most of the time, the fear is a fear of change. This process is changing you. It's making you into a different person. And if you continue with it, who are you going to be? And what happens to the old you? And all the structures you build up over the time, and all the interactions that kind of depend on the old you being there, constant. So you can feel your life starting to shift and change, and that's scary because you have no guarantee that what's coming is better. Is this going to turn me into a flake? Am I going to, wander away? Am I not going to come back? What's happening to me? Where am I going? And then it's, and you run into that block. Well, the only way to get by that block is to just have the courage and say, I want to do it. I'm committed to growing up. I want to learn. I want to follow, I want to follow the truth, as far as I can. So I'll just do it. And if I change, I'll deal with it. If it tears up things because I'm somebody else, I'll deal with it. But I need to go on. You see, otherwise you're trapped. If you don't have the courage to say, I'll go on anyway, it's that important, and mean it, then you're trapped. You'll never get but so far, at least not in this lifetime, because you're trapped. Fear is a trap. So and you may look for some beliefs too. Aren't people who do this kind of stuff in mental institutions? I hear voices talking to me. Oh my God, what's that? I'm hearing voices now. Am I going nuts? Should I quit this stuff? Is this dangerous? You see, we have those sorts of things. People worry about that. And then they quit and they say, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm starting to hear voices. This isn't good for me. I'm turning, into, a mental patient here. But you have to have the courage to say, well, if that's where it takes me, then when I hear a voice, I'll say, hello, who is that? I'll find, I'll just deal with it as it happens. I'm okay, I'm in charge here. I don't feel crazy. I just have this strange stuff happening to me. Well, you have to have enough confidence in yourself that you have the courage to keep on walking. You're an explorer. It's like the explorers. They got off the boat, they step onto the beach, and then there's a jungle. What's in that jungle? Wild animals, natives with spears, who knows? Well, are we going to get on the boat and go back because we don't want to walk into the jungle because it might be scary? Well, you need the courage. And sometimes there are animals and, natives with spears. And sometimes the explorers don't make it. Oh, well, try again next time. You see, it's not that big a deal. You get a next time and a next time. Now, you want to do it right here, but getting back on the boat, if that's not acceptable, then you just go on and say, whatever happens, I'll deal with it. And if it gets in too deep that I can't deal with it, I'll start to back away. So if in case I get in that jungle and there's too many natives with spears and there's too many wild animals, I'm going back on the boat and maybe land someplace else. So you don't have to be stupid about it, but you do have to have the courage to take the step and see what happens. It's just a matter of courage, but it can be scary. And that's why most people quit meditation. It's because they become successful at it. And what you're doing in meditation is that it's your first glimpse of you as a consciousness. Because otherwise it's your intellect's view of you. And the intellect is saying, you're a fine person, you're terrific just the way you are. You don't need any of this silly stuff. Your intellect's giving you all of this. But once you get to that state and suddenly you're successful, there you are, naked. You see, just your consciousness, who you are. And sometimes that is that's scary, who you are. Because you will often see your fears. You will confront your fears as, whatever, monsters, demons, things happening to you. You actually, you can say hallucinate, see, manifest your fears, and then you have to deal with them. And then it gets to be like, people don't want to go to sleep because they have nightmares. You get the same thing. You don't want to meditate because you keep running into yourself and it's scary. So you go away, but it just takes courage. You have to get to that point. A lot of people, when they do out of body, they feel like they'll die. What if I don't come back? What if I'm out there and something happens and I can't get back? Then what? Do I die? Well, no, that's not going to happen, but now that's being rational. This is not a rational fear. You have to get to the point of saying, if that happens, it happens. If I don't come back, I'll go on. You see? You have to be an explorer. You have to be able to, walk into something unknown. Again, we're talking about uncertainty. You have to learn to live gracefully with uncertainty and say, I'll deal with it when I get there. I'm pretty capable. I can deal with a lot of stuff. If I can't, I'll try to retreat, but if I can't, I'll do my best I can. Best that I can, and if all ends badly, next time, we'll be better. We'll start over and we'll do better next time. So if you have that sort of thing, then, if you don't, if you believe there is no next time, then that gives you a little more of a pucker factor. Oh, I only got one shot, I better be careful. But that's like saying, I'm afraid to go outside. If I go outside, I might get in a car wreck, I might get mugged, a rock might fall out of the sky and hit me, so I'll just stay here in my closet at home. You see how limited you are. You can't grow that way. You can't live that way. You can't interact that way. So you might as well have courage. At least you're trying. You'll get points for trying anyway. So, courage is the antidote. But it's common. Don't feel like this is just you. A lot of people run into that same barrier of fear. And mostly it's the fear that's inside them. So it's a good way of knowing where your fear is and what it is.
Yeah, Tom, my question relates very similar to the previous question. When I first started trying to go out of body, I was lying on my back. I actually did talk to you about this once online. And I fell through the floor. Like I felt like I just dropped straight through, maybe like 10 feet or something like that. And it was extreme fear that sort of brought me back. But I'm wondering why it caused me to feel physically sick as well.
Well, fear can make you feel physically sick. When you get a shot of fear and a shot of adrenaline that comes behind that fear, it can make you physically ill, usually in the stomach area, in the solar plexus, sometimes in the head. But physically ill is a result of all the chemicals that start secreting in your body when you are afraid. You get, so that's why you had physical. Now why you had that sudden drop like that, the reason you probably had that sudden drop was what we call a fear test. Okay, you don't want to be doing out of body if you are frightened, if you have a lot of fear, because in that realm, it's just like in the dream realm. You create your own reality there very quickly. You know, it's like you'd like to eat a pistachio ice cream cone. There's one in your hand, and you can lick it, and it'll taste just exactly like, you know, pistachio ice cream cone. You can create reality there very quickly. So if you go there and say, oh, what if I run into demons or bad things? There's the demons, there they are, you did it, you see? So if you get into the out-of-body state and you're fearful, you're going to have a very bad experience, and it's probably going to be a bad time. Okay? Same with the people who take drugs to blast themselves into there. If they do that, they have a very bad trip. You know, so the system tends to prevent that by giving people who are trying it fear tests. Oh, how about we just drop the bottom out of your reality and you fall a few hundred feet, you know? How's that? And if that's, and you get the fear, then you flunked the fear test, now you're back in your body, and besides that, you have a stomachache. You know, that's you're not quite ready yet. So you keep working at that, and the next time, that won't happen because you're already, okay, I'm on to that one. You know, if I drop down, that's okay now. Now they try something else. You'll get out of body, and the first thing that'll happen as you get there, two big guys will show up and start beating you, you know, and you'll run back into your body. That's your fear that's beating you. So when you get to the point that it's, okay, you know, again, give me your best shot, you know, I'm up for this. And you drop, you know, the big people come after you or whatever, and you're not afraid. You'll see, poof, they'll all disappear. And then you won't have that anymore. So that's the thing. You need to deal with the fear. But you manifest a lot of that fear. And the system will give you a fear test because you don't belong there if you have a lot of fear.
Is there any difference between trying to achieve something in, say, point consciousness or, say, lucid dream state? Because I find being in a lucid dream state and being conscious of being there and being able to do things a lot more effective. Like I seem to be in a lot more control there than what I am if I'm in a point consciousness. If I try and do anything there, I just snap out of it.
Yeah, that's a belief. That's a belief trap that has you trapped there. What you believe that in the dream state, you have this belief that I can control that. Okay, I'm in the dream. This is a dream, and I can control this dream. I'm okay, and you kind of know what you're doing, and your feet on the ground. You've done it before. It's familiar, and then you can use it. You're not that familiar with the point consciousness, and a lot of people, when I say go to point consciousness, they go there, and again, they're thinking, I can't think because if I think, that's ego. So they just float there. Which is good. You should do that for a long time until you get to where you can really hold it. They don't realize that they can use their intent to do anything they want there. And it'll work well. When you're in the lucid dream state, you can use your intent to do what you want. It's just that you're not quite as focused there as you would be in the point consciousness state. Because in the dream state, you have a surrounding, right? You got an environment. You got your body. Well, it's a dream body. It's not the one that's laying in the bed, but you got stuff that you're processing. Whereas in the point consciousness state, you're not processing anything. And that way your intent is more focused and more powerful. And from there, wherever you go, you know, you can kind of keep that tight focus. So the point conscious state is really a more powerful, more general state, but you're more familiar with the lucid state. That's why it's easier for you to work in it.
I'd say more effective because it seems physical and I can see.
Yeah.
The point consciousness, like, and I can't be there for very long, it just feels like a black void, a three-dimensional black void type of thing, with just nothing.
It is, but you can think there too.
But as soon as I try and direct something, I would analyze, and that's where I
yeah. It may be that there's a sense that
Do excuse me for one moment. Rafa actually just asked if he could have his break now because his voice is going. So you want to finish that?
Okay, we'll finish this one exchange and then we'll do that. Uh-oh, Rafa. It's not good. We got a long way to go. Yeah. Okay. It's probably, again, you're thinking that the point consciousness state, you probably have a definition of that. That's when I'm floating in the void, and that's point consciousness. So anything you do other than that breaks the point consciousness state, because now you've broken the definition. You have to broaden your definition. So point consciousness state is just a door. That's where I start from. From there, I can manifest a body if I want and go fly around. I can go to Aunt Susie and try to heal her arthritis. You know, I can do any of those things. And you can make images, and you can have a body, and you can do whatever you want to do. But you start from the point consciousness state, because then your focus of going to help heal Aunt Susie is a real clean, clear focus. And you're focused right in on that. In the dream state, there's often a lot of other things going on. But it doesn't really matter. If you do the lucid dream and then you can get a tight focus, same difference. Really doesn't make any difference. It's not that the one is better than others, just one's easier than the other. Well, if you find lucid dreaming easier, use it. Don't bother with the point consciousness. So it's not really a problem. It's all the same thing. It's all intent and awareness and being clear without being distracted. And if you can do that from a lucid dream better than anything else, that's a good tool for you. And you should use it. Poor Rafa. Let's hear it for Rafa. You're doing a good job, Rafa.
Okay, we're going to go to break now, and this is like an hour's break. So, it's an hour. Now, after half an hour, if anyone wants to come back into here, we're going to do a 20-minute meditation. Okay? So if you want to come back in half an hour, we're going to do a 20-minute meditation using the TLC neurotechnology. Okay?